All right, everybody, welcome back. Fade to Black, bespoke radio for the masses. On the Game Changer Network, I am your host, Jimmy Church. I'm enjoying the freedom that this mic is giving me. I need to behave. I'm moving around too much in the studio. It's just great. It's great. Great mic. Okay. I know everybody wants me to comment a little bit about what's going on, and I'm going to say this. And see, I'm not even going to address the title. There's nothing going on. There's nothing going on. I have no statements to make. I will say this, though. It was a lot of fun over at Coast to Coast this weekend. I want to thank everybody over at Coast, Premier, iHeartRadio. They run such a great, it is a machine over there. They make life wonderful. And the preparation and the way that they deal with things, it just, oh man, so much fun. Even though it's 10 till 2 a.m., the 4 hours blows by like it's not even there. And you get to the end and you're like, wow, I just want to keep going. It was so much fun. And thanks to Stuart Swerdlow, too, by the way, and Mike Barra, producer Trish, a total professional, and Brian. Brian was so funny because to watch a really pro board op work, it's a full-time job, man. And watching him stand at attention with his finger on the dump button when we were taking calls, just absolutely awesome. We had a great time. Thanks for all of the calls. I was able to hang out with all of the Fadernauts that night and Twitter and all of the new Twitter followers, the Coast to Coast listeners that embraced everything, and it was awesome. So I just want to say it was great. Thank you. And that's it. It was just a great time. There is no conspiracy. There's nothing going on. The mentions of little things here and there about me being stolen and traded and grabbed and all of this. That's not the case. I'm not a commodity. I am my own man. I make my own decisions. Nobody made any decisions for me, and there was nothing nothing like it. What's crazy about it, if I have any comments to make, is I haven't said anything publicly about it. I haven't tweeted. I haven't done anything socially. I haven't said anything. And to watch everybody make up their own minds. But you know what? It's not, I don't have a dog in this fight. Okay? I don't. I'm not part of it. I'm quite simply not. I think everything is one-sided too, as well, as I see everything kind of unravel itself, and the comments that are going on about me leaving one network and starting our own over here has nothing to do with nothing at all with Coast to Coast, and it has nothing to do with Dark Matter. I mean, Dark Matter is a fine network. There's nothing, trust me when I say this, there's no drama. There's nothing there. Everything that you read, everything that you hear are people making comments that quite simply were not part of anything. Nobody, not a host on Dark Matter, not a fan, not a friend. Nobody knows anything. The only people that know the truth, it's not even about the truth. The only people that know the facts, there's 4. And that's it. There's nothing to comment. And everything you hear is hypothesis, hyperbole. It's just based on imagination. It's not based on fact. So everybody just relax. There's so much, there's so little to this. It would shock you. And I know everybody wants drama, but there isn't. I wish I could feed the fire, but there's nothing to do. Okay? All right. So with that, the only drama exits in the minds of the people who created it. That's right. That just came in from Twitter. Save the drama for your mama. I like that one, too. That's from Jack. Okay. Stale Sweet Roll says, I'm a little concerned that if DMRN couldn't hold your show, it won't be able to contain Arts when he comes back either. Well, Keith and... okay, I'm not going to get into all that. I'm not going to get... They're going to be just fine. Let's just wish Art the best. It's a tough world out there, and he's Art, and he's going to be just fine. There's nothing going on. Trust me. Okay. All right, let's get to some news that you may know nothing about. What some say represents stunning visual evidence of a humanoid creature that was found crashed near Roswell, New Mexico in 1947 will soon be released in an international live stream event. Referred to by some as the Roswell Slides, the Kodachrome images have now been authenticated by expert scientists, and their provenance has been confirmed. During that long process, many have speculated about precisely what these pictures show. People will now be able to see for themselves with the public reveal of the slides on May 5th, 2015. The event will include presenters Dr. Edgar Mitchell. I've got an announcement about Edgar we're going to be unrolling this week, by the way. It's pretty cool. The Sixth Man on the Moon, as well as Tom Carey and Don Schmidt. Transmitted live from a 10,000-seat auditorium in Mexico City, the history and the background context of the slides will be detailed. Now, what's on the two slides? When Don Schmidt was on this program, I pressed him for that information. Done a little investigating myself. And this story and all of the information that I've got for you tonight comes from the UFO Chronicles. You can go check out www.ufochronicles.com. Great website, by the way. And not an endorsement, sort of. No, it's a great website. Is this. Apparently, the two slides show a decapitated, headless E.T. That's right. That's right. It's in some type of glass case that they used for an autopsy. It's decapitated. The organs have been removed. Apparently, now I haven't seen it. This is just what is, some leaked information. Now, the dates of 1947, and I don't want to, the thoughts of, for all of us, the thoughts of the alien autopsy film and how that was authenticated and everything. Of course, that is going to come to mind. But they've done all of their due diligence this time around. So I'm not so sure we're going to be up against that. But the two slides were found in a trunk that were like behind a, taped to the lid of the trunk or hidden behind something. And the lady that owned the trunk was a high-profile lawyer. Her husband, I believe, was a geologist, and they ran with some pretty high circles. Now, the dates of 1947, apparently the husband was in that general area. He's a geologist. What all of this actually means, I don't know. Is this what it seems to be? Well, the announcement seems to be pretty grandiose. So let's just see. And I say that because you don't want to unveil something like this that is so dramatic and have it deflated like that day or the next day. I'm very curious about this. The secrecy behind it, the computer hacking, the stolen files, the stuff that has been going on behind the scenes with this entire case is extraordinary. It's beyond belief. And so we're going to find out on May 5th. the Kodachrome slides. A new report from the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, released today estimates that the United States will spend $348 billion on nuclear weapons over the next decade, or 5% to 6% of the total cost of the administration's plans for national defense. But this is just the tip of the coming budget wave. Over the next 30 years, the bill could add up to $1 trillion, according to a recent report of the National Defense Panel review of the 2014 Quadrennial Defense Review. This planned spending encompasses a massive rebuild of all three legs of existing nuclear triad of land-based missiles, submarine-based missiles, short and long-range bombers, and their associated warheads. For the first time, listen to this. I've never heard of this before. I could be naive. But for the first time, a Danish mortgage bank, Nordea Credit, issued a mortgage with a negative interest rate. That's right. This means that Nordea Credit this week have had to pay interest back of charging them to a handful of customers, says the housing economist at Nordea Credit, Lisa Nytoft Bergman. How is it possible that someone could go to a bank, take out a mortgage, and expect the bank to give them money back every single month? It doesn't sound right, and it seems scamish to me. But apparently it's not a scam. It's called deflation. The interest rates of Germany, Switzerland, and Finland went negative weeks ago. The Danish central bank cut the deposit rate to a minus 0.35%. The Swiss had already cut it to minus 0.75 before that, and Finland is at minus 0.2. Think about that for a second. How is that possible? If you have a negative interest rate, what is the compounded interest over the life of the loan? As we all know, you get a 30-year mortgage, you buy your house for $300,000, you're buying it for what, $600,000 over 30 years? I'm pulling numbers out of the air, but you know the drill and you know how it works. Well, if it's negative, so you buy it for $300,000 and over 30 years it costs you $250,000? I don't know. It's confusing to me, and it just doesn't sound right. That's not how the NWO and the Rothschilds and the Illuminati are supposed to be running the banking system. Hey, listen, I got to get to this. Kathleen's going to be a minute late. I've got to get this story in. Proving that tattoos can age well, all 61 tattoos on the mummified Otzi the Iceman have been mapped, and they still look pretty darn good. Whoa, run these pictures right now in Twitter. You guys got to see this. Anthropologists mapped the ink on a 5,300-year-old Iceman using a new imaging technique, revealing previously unknown tattoos. It's a 5,300-year-old dude. With this new census in hand, researchers hope to finally answer the question of what the tattoos mean. In September 1991, two tourists discovered the Iceman's remains nestled into a glacier in the Italian Alps. The Iceman's 61 tattoos are organized into 19 different groups. Each group of tattoos is simply a set of horizontal or vertical lines. You have to see these pictures. The pictures are incredible. It is believed that the tattoos served a therapeutic or diagnostic purpose for the Iceman, because the tattoo groupings tend to cluster around the lower back and joints, places where the Iceman was suffering from joint and spinal degeneration. You've got to see these pictures, and we're going to get these up right now. This is Fade to Black, bespoke radio for the masses, only on the Game Changer Network. There it is, at JChurch Radio. That's what you want to do. At JChurch Radio is the Twitter handle. Come follow us, hashtag F2B, and check out the Iceman's tattoos. Make sense out of that. That is 5,300 years old. I'll be back right after this. shoot me an email to jimmy@jimmychurchradio.com. Follow us on Twitter @jchurchradio. This is Fade to Black. Tonight, Kathleen Marden, Betty and Barney Hill, The Interrupted Journey. Get comfortable. Get ready. Fade to Black is back. We'll be back right after this. Stay with us.
This is Toby Kebbell. You're listening to JimmyChurchRadio.com. Don't hurt me, Jimmy. I'm only little.
Hey, I'm Adrian Grenier.
And this is Ari Gold.
We're of the Honey Brothers.
Yes.
We're of the Honey Brothers. Hey, I'm Adrian Grenier.
And I'm Ari Gold.
We're the Honey Brothers.
And you're listening to Jimmy Church.
The Revolution.
KJCR.
JimmyChurchRadio.com.
Despite popular opinion, reading a book will not make you smarter.
But listening to Jimmy Church will.
All right, welcome back. Fade to Black, bespoke radio for the masses. Yeah. I'm turning some knobs here. All right, we're good. All right. Follow us on Twitter right now @JChurchRadio. That's what you want to do. Hashtag F2B will get you into the sandbox. And like I said earlier in the intro to the show, Betty and Barney Hill and The Interrupted Journey took me down this journey into ufology. It was an epiphany for me. And tonight, Kathleen Marden joins us, and she is known around the world for her work as a UFO abduction, ET contact researcher, experiencer, advocate, author, and lecturer. She has 25 years' experience in the field. For the last 4 years, she has served as MUFON's Director of Abduction Research. In 2012, the Mutual UFO Network named her Ufologist of the Year. She is also a member of the Foundation for Research of Extraterrestrial Encounters Advisory Board and a consultant to FREE's Research Subcommittee. She earned a BA degree in social work from the University of New Hampshire in 1971 and participated in graduate studies in education while working as a teacher and education services coordinator. She also has extensive training in hypnosis. Her interest in UFOs dates back to September 20th, 1961, when her aunt, Betty Hill, phoned her nearby home to report that she and Barney had encountered a flying saucer in New Hampshire's White Mountains. A primary witness to the evidence of the UFO encounter and the aftermath, Kathleen has intimate knowledge of the Hills' biographical histories, personalities, and the previously unpublished historical files pertaining to their sensational story. She is the author of 3 books, Captured: The Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience, and Science Was Wrong, with nuclear physicist, scientific ufologist, and our friend Stanton Friedman, and The Alien Abduction Files with Denise Stoner. Additionally, her essays appear in several books. Her articles have been published in the MUFON UFO Journal, Open Minds, and Fate magazines, and on several websites. Kathy has appeared in television and radio programs in the U.S., Canada, Australia, and the U.K., and has lectured throughout the United States. She is recognized, I'm pressing a button here, I shouldn't have done that. She is recognized as the world's leading expert on Betty and Barney Hill. I'd like to welcome to the program Kathleen Marden. Kathleen, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Hello.
That was, right before I got you on with us, I was running around the studio, and I'm literally winded right now, and I prepared this bio for you today. It's a long one. Wow.
Sorry about that. I could have given you a short one if you'd asked for it.
Well, like I said, I prepped it. I shortened it up, but I was like, there's too much here. We've got to keep it all in. And here, I'm just like... So anyway, welcome to the show, young lady. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
And now you're on the East Coast, and
yes, I'm in Florida.
With all of the action that has been going on up in the north, with all of the storms, is Florida any rain? Or you guys, did you guys escape all of the madness?
We are having a cooler and rainier winter than usual. Florida's a sunshine state, and I've been down here for 5 years now, and this winter is pretty unusual in my estimation. We generally get a lot of sun, but we've had a lot of rain this year. The lakes are filling right up.
Do you get a chance to go back to New Hampshire often?
I go back every summer.
With the family, after this is kind of a candid question, but it's an honest one. Do you guys sit around and talk about Betty and Barney and the experience, or are you guys, as a family, do you try to avoid it, or do you embrace it? How do you guys deal with it?
Well, I don't think that we really sit around and talk about it as a family. I mean, we mention it sometimes. We mention our memories of living through that period of time because there is a lot going on, not just with Betty and Barney, but on my grandparents' farm. I grew up across the street from their farm, the UFO sightings. Betty was participating in a science experiment with a team trying to vector in a craft. There was a UFO that landed on my grandparents' farm. We talk about that. We try to put all of this together to reconstruct it and into a timeline, because I was a teenager when that was happening. My brother was a couple of years younger than I, and my father is now 92, and he's remembering it too and filling in more details. So we do talk about that sort of thing, the parts that we were involved in.
Sure. And let me ask you about that for a second. Did the craft that landed on your family's property, was that before Betty and Barney's experience?
No, it wasn't. This started in about 1966. And Betty, it was after the experience. The experience happened in 61.
Right.
They underwent hypnosis for 6 months in 1964. And then Robert Homan and C.D. Jackson were two of the early investigators. They had interviewed Betty and Barney in November of 1961.
Mm-hmm.
They were the ones who helped to put together the timeline that indicated Betty and Barney had lost at least 2 hours time that night. And so Betty had contacted Robert Homan. They both worked at IBM. Robert Homan was a writer for IBM. C.D. Jackson was a senior engineer. Betty had contacted them after the hypnosis sessions were completed and told them what had been revealed. And then Betty had talked about how she, as she was departing, as she was being escorted down to the car by this extraterrestrial being, said to him, I don't know very much, but I could put you in touch with some individuals, some scientists who you could have a conversation with, that you would be able to share information. And he said to her, well, maybe that's a possibility, but I don't make those decisions, essentially. But maybe we will come back. And so Betty said to him, well, how would you know how to find me? And he said, we can always find those that we wish to find. And so, it was this kind of thing that intrigued Robert Homan and C.D. Jackson. And they decided to ask Betty if she would participate in an experiment with them in order to attempt to call in a UFO.
Well, there are so many firsts, if you know what I'm saying. I'll say that plural. There are so many firsts with Betty and Barney's encounter, not only for ufology but for science in general. Mm-hmm. And we have plenty of time tonight. We're going to go on that interrupted journey tonight, and I'm excited about that. And I know that I mentioned to you earlier today, and I certainly mentioned it at the beginning of this program and introducing you. It was that book that really, really opened up my eyes. Prior to that, I was totally fascinated and tried to study as much as I could, but it was that book and the Andreessen Affair at the same time when I read them both that showed me that there was something else going on here. It just wasn't, I say this word all the time, the fantastical. Photographs of flying saucers from the 50s. There was more to ufology than just that, and videos and so forth. And so
Absolutely.
I want to jump back, and I want you to take us through the events in 1961 on September 19th. Let's kind of start there. Nobody tells the story like you. I went a couple of years ago. I watched you and Stanton do a couple of presentations together, and I was just glued. Okay, I mean, wow. So let's go back. And again, for me, this is great stuff, and I'm so excited to get you. I'm going to try to hold back my excitement tonight, and I'll try to remain objective. But this is great stuff for all of us. And so let's back up. They're on the road on U.S. Route 3, I think, if my memory serves me right.
You're correct.
Okay, up in New Hampshire. They're driving back home, right? That was the intention. Mm-hmm. And I'll hand it off to you. What happened next?
Yes, they had been on vacation to Niagara Falls and Montreal, Canada, and they were driving home at night, anticipating that they would arrive at their home in Seacoast, New Hampshire, at about 2:00 in the morning. They're driving down Route 3 through the White Mountains of New Hampshire when Betty spots a new light in the sky. And it's a bright night. The moon is a waxing gibbous moon, about 3/4 full. The visibility is very, very good. It's a clear sky. And this new light, it attracts her attention. She's wondering what it is. It's moving. Could it be a satellite? And it comes closer. It grows larger and larger in the sky. And this really began to pique her curiosity as they drove south. And finally, she asked Barney to pull over to the side of the road so she could get a look at this thing. And this was in an area called the Mount Cleveland picnic area, south of Twin Mountain, where they finally stopped for the first time. Got out of the car. They had binoculars with them because they had been sightseeing, and looked up at this craft. And they had their little dog with them, a little dachshund, and Barney walked the dog while Betty held the binoculars to her eyes, looking at the craft as it flew across the face of the moon, and then started to head west, it appeared, northwest toward Vermont. And then she handed the binoculars to Barney and got back into the car and with the dog. And Barney stood there with the binoculars watching this craft, and suddenly it moved back toward him very, very rapidly. And at that point, he could tell that it was silent and very, very perplexing to him because he thought he could see windows in it at that point, and he thought that he should have been able to hear the engine on the plane because it was close enough, but he couldn't. And very perplexing, he got back into the car. He was a skeptic. He did not believe that UFOs were real. He said if anyone had told him they saw one, he would have thought they were lying. So they get into the car, they're heading down Route 3, and this craft all of a sudden starts coming in quite close to them, much, much closer. And Betty is watching it from the passenger seat while Barney's driving along. The next area that they entered was Franconia Notch, which is a beautiful scenic notch that cuts through the mountains on each side of it. That's where the Old Man of the Mountain, New Hampshire's state symbol, used to be. Mm-hmm. And that was a natural rock formation that resembled the face of an old man. And the reason that I'm mentioning this is that old man's profile was 48 feet from forehead to chin. And this UFO came and stopped right beside the old man's profile. And Betty at that point could see that it was 1.5 to 2 times the length of the old man's profile. They got out of the car, they looked at it again with binoculars, and it appeared to be spinning or rotating. And it appeared to be lighted on only one side, so that there was this sort of blip, blip, blip as it spun around.
Gotcha.
And then it started moving again. And it was moving more in a stair-step pattern. Very, very perplexing to them. And then it seemed to be bouncing back and forth in the sky. And Barney was anxious to head home. He didn't want to hang around and look at this thing and try to identify it any longer. He said, let's get in the car. I want to get back to Portsmouth. So they drove through Franconia Notch, and out the south entrance to Franconia Notch is where the tourist area is. You'll start to see cabins and motels and tourist attractions in there. And Betty and Barney finally reached that point. It was only about 8 miles south of the Old Man of the Mountain. And at this point, Betty started to become excited because the craft was coming in very close. And Barney began to look for another place to pull over to the side of the road. But before he was able to do that, the craft shifted ahead and stopped right over the highway and just to the right of the passenger side of the car, and started to descend in their direction. It stopped approximately 200 feet above their vehicle. Barney was forced to stop the car, to park the car right in the middle of the highway on the center line in order not to be directly underneath it. Betty looked up at it through the passenger's side window. It was huge. It looked like a flattened, like a pancake. There was a row of windows around the forward edge. There was a blue-white light shining out from behind that. Barney stepped out of the car with the binoculars and looked up at it. And as he was watching it, it once again changed position. And there was an adjacent field next to where Barney was standing, just to the east, which would be to the left of Barney. And it shifted over to the field, and Barney followed it to the field. It was a farmer's field. There were apple trees there, a little farm stand, and Barney walked in and he looked up at the craft again. Now it was only about 100 feet in the air. And as he was watching it, he could see figures behind the window. There were about 8 to 11 figures there. They all looked pretty much alike. They were all looking down at him, and then suddenly all but one moved away from the window and to a panel that appeared to be on the back side of the circular corridor. At this point, he could see them from the tops of their heads down to about their knees or below their knees. And he said their arms went up. When their arms went up, the craft started to tip in his direction. There were little fins with red lights that they seemed to slide out of the side of this, and something started to drop out of the bottom of it. While this was happening, this leader, he called him, at the window, was staring down at Barney. Barney wanted to run away. He was terrified because at that moment he sensed that he was going to be captured like a bug in a net, that they were ready to carry out a plan. And that is what that plan was. And he wanted to run away at that point. He's terrified. But he had great difficulty pulling the binoculars down away from his eyes. I don't know if he was starting to come under their control, and that's what caused it, or what. But he
was doing what any of us would have done. No, absolutely. I would have been glued. I remember reading that part of the story and or his account. No, he was doing what anybody. There's no way that you would stop looking at such an extraordinary moment. What was?
Well, I think I might have if I thought that craft was descending to capture me. I think I would have gotten the heck out of that field and back to the car as fast as possible.
Yeah, of course, we all think about this in our own mind. What would you do in a situation like that? And no, I'm staying with the binocular side. What was Betty doing at this point? Was she yelling, Barney?
Yes, she was seated in the car. Since it was parked in the middle of the road, she couldn't just leave it there. A car might come along. So,
sure.
But she had the driver's side door was open, and she was yelling to Barney. Come back here. Where are you, Barney? And she was actually ready just to move the car and get out and go into that field to find him when she heard him running back. He had incidentally broken the leather strap on the binoculars, pulling them so violently down away from his eyes as he made his escape back to the car. As he was running back, he saw this craft follow him, and he got into the car, threw the binoculars on the seat, took off down Route 3 as fast as he could go, and said to Betty, roll down your window, look up and see if you can see it. So she did. She did that. She was expecting to see the lights from it. She looked up and she didn't see the lights. All she saw was blackness. And so she thought that she didn't see the craft, but she later realized that it was right above the car, and what she was seeing was the bottom side of it. Within seconds, Betty and Barney heard a series of code-like buzzing sounds striking the trunk of the vehicle. And as this happened, a tingling sensation passed through their bodies, and the car started to vibrate. The next thing they knew, they were about 35 miles down the road, and they had very, very little memory for what had happened in the interim. They remembered that observing a fiery orb that appeared to be on the ground, and it was moving, but they weren't moving. They remembered encountering a roadblock someplace along the line. They didn't know all about that, where it was, what it was all about. They heard a second series of these buzzing sounds on the vehicle that brought them back to full consciousness. They started talking to each other again. They thought that they would like to have human contact, to get a cup of coffee, to do something, and there was nothing open. They couldn't find anyone to talk to on the way home. When they arrived in Portsmouth to their home, they realized that they were later than they had anticipated, and actually it was about 5 o'clock in the morning. They discovered it was dawn. The sun was streaking the sky. Betty got out. She walked the dog and went inside. She said to Barney, leave the suitcases in the trunk of the car for now. Later she said, take them out and leave them on the porch. She didn't want them in the house. She was afraid they were contaminated because this craft was so close, and they knew at that point that it was nothing that belonged to us, because Barney had conscious, continuous recall of observing beings on board that craft that were somehow not human. That's in the original reports.
This is Fade to Black, bespoke radio for the masses. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. We are talking with Kathleen Marden, and we're recounting, and we're going to go through tonight. We're going to discuss other things with Kathleen's work with the abduction phenomenon that has been going on for decades all around the world. We'll get to that, and we're going to go on an interrupted journey tonight with Betty and Barney Hill. And now with that, and we are on the Game Changer Network. Okay, plugs over. With that, what happened next? Now, you mentioned a couple of things that morning, that there were some things that they remembered. Obviously, there was a huge chunk of stuff that came out later. But were they actually discussing that morning the possibility of a craft? Did they have that much memory of everything at that point?
Oh, yes. They sat down, and they each drew the craft that they remembered. Barney's drawing shows a craft when it was 200 feet above them. When it was 100 feet above him, it shows figures standing in the windows looking down at him. Yes, they both had very good recall of the craft at very close range.
Now, you mentioned, how old were you at this point?
I was 13.
You were 13, and you mentioned the phone call. When did the phone call come in?
That afternoon, Betty phoned my mother, her sister, and I had just arrived home from school that day and overheard the conversation and was quite intrigued by all of this and perplexed too. Betty was very concerned about contamination. And we had a neighbor who was a physicist. Betty wanted my mother to call him to ask for his opinion, what they should do. I mean, because this family was not into the UFO subject. My mother had a fairly close encounter with a craft in 1958, but we hadn't talked about it as a family. It was something that happened once, and that was it. But now we were really beginning to talk about this and trying to figure it out. My mother called the neighbor, and he said to Betty, for some reason that I'll never know, but he said, if you have a compass, take the compass and take it out to the car and see how the needle responds. And we know that the needle is going to move when you put it near the battery up by the engine. But Betty didn't do that. She took it out and she ran it along the side of the car and then up to the trunk of the car. And that's when she spotted for the first time shiny spots on the trunk. And those spots corresponded to the area where she and Barney heard those buzzing sounds striking the trunk. They were concentric circles and about the size of $half, and very, very perplexing because when she put the compass near them, the needle would spin and spin.
Were you there? Were you there when she did this?
I was there the next day, or 2 days later.
So yeah. How far away did Betty and Barney live from you and your family?
17 miles from my childhood
okay,
home.
So you guys are neighbors, basically. Okay,
yes.
okay.
Yes.
And so did when your mom hung up the phone. I have to know. One of the great things is you were there for that very moment, and it's a moment in history, and you were there for that. Your mom hangs up the phone. What did your mom say? How did she react?
My mom, she just said, "Your aunt and uncle saw a flying saucer last night, and it came so close to them that they're really worried about radiation and cosmic rays, and they don't know what to do, and we need to figure out what to do about this."
And what was your reaction? Was your mom being facetious? Or is she, believing Betty? It's her sister, so. Oh. How was your mom handling this, and was your mom freaking out too as well?
Well, my mother took it very seriously, and wanted to help Betty and Barney. So that's why she called her neighbor, who was a physicist.
Sure.
And then my father's best friend always stopped by for coffee on the way home from work. He was the former chief of police in Newton, New Hampshire. And so my mother called Betty again when he arrived, and he said that Betty and Barney should report it to Pease Air Force Base, to Project Blue Book. And so that gave them another idea of something they could do. They could call the Air Force to see what the Air Force would recommend.
What happened next?
Well, Betty... after they found the spots in the trunk of the car, Betty also had a dress that was torn in several locations. The dress she was wearing on the night of the incident had been in fine shape when she put it on in the morning. When she took it off after this incident, there was a 2-inch tear in the stitching at the top of the zipper on the back of her dress, a 1-inch tear in the thick zipper fabric. The lining was torn from waist to hemline, and the hem was torn down on one side. No commonplace explanation that she could think of for any of this. She placed the dress in her closet, and knowing that it needed to be repaired. Well, the next time she took it out, it was coated with a pink powdery substance that he had degraded the fiber of the fabric of the dress and reduced it to a rag. The tops of Barney's best dress shoes were so deeply scraped he had to buy new shoes. There were all sorts of things going on here.
Where is that dress today, by the way?
The dress is in an archival collection at the University of New Hampshire.
Right.
Special Collections Library.
Is it on display?
Occasionally, but they keep it in a cardboard box in tissue paper, and if you'd like to see it, then you can request it, and you have to wear white gloves.
Now, there's one elephant in the room that we can't avoid not only discussing, but everybody that got involved in this case, especially in 1961, is that Betty and Barney were an interracial couple. And back then, first off, that was not the norm, okay? That wasn't the norm. And the last thing that an interracial couple would want in 1961 is sensationalism. Is something like this, and attracting attention. Was that an obvious point of concern for not only for those two, but for the family in general?
Well, let me tell you, the big point of concern was Betty was a social worker for the state of New Hampshire.
Right.
Barney worked for the post office, and the big concern all along is that they were active in the civil rights movement in the NAACP. Barney was the legal redress for the local board. He was on the regional board. And actually in 1964, he had been appointed by the governor of the state of New Hampshire to serve on the U.S. Civil Rights Commission's State Advisory Committee. So here is a couple who are upstanding members of the community, known in certain areas around the state. They worked for voters' rights. They worked on the literacy program. They were very actively involved in doing good things for the community. They'd helped to set up the Rockingham County Community Action Program through the Office of Economic Opportunity. Barney received an award for his work on that. He was the first chairman of the board of directors of that. So, the last thing that anyone would want would be for Betty and Barney's story to go public. And that's why we intended for it never to go public, in order to protect them and in order to protect the family. But in 1965, it leaked out to a Boston newspaper reporter, and he published it in the newspaper. The story ran for 5 days in a row. Betty and Barney and the family were horrified.
No media at all from 1961 to 1965. Well, no, forget about that part. But immediately after the event, the story just managed to stay silent, and nobody came a knocking in September, October, November immediately after.
Well, the Air Force, there was a report to the Air Force. Betty and Barney reported it to Pease Air Force Base.
Right.
But they didn't come knocking. They took the report, and then they called back the next day, and they said that they had picked something up on radar. Actually, there were 2 radar stations that picked something up. One was the North Concord radar station in Vermont, which was only about 15 miles from where they had their close encounter. The other one was at Pease Air Force Base in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. So they knew about the radar sighting at Pease.
Right.
And then Betty went to the Portsmouth Public Library, wanted to learn whatever she could about UFOs, flying saucers, they called them then, and took a book out. And in that book, it was written by Donald Kehoe, who was the head of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. And in the book was an address, and he asked people if they had a sighting to please write and report it. So she sat down, she wrote a letter, and reported it. And a couple of weeks later, she received a phone call from Walter Webb, who was an investigator for NICAP. He worked at the Hayden Planetarium down in Boston. He was an astronomer, and he had actually worked on a project with Alan Hynek, who worked for Project Blue Book for a while, and then started the Center for UFO Studies much later in his life, when he decided there was really something to this and he wasn't going to debunk it anymore. So anyway, that sort of thing was going on in that time frame. And of course, Homan and Jackson heard about this from Donald Kehoe as well at a meeting in Washington, D.C., and they got in touch with Betty and Barney. So, we had the Air Force, we had 3 investigators and Donald Kehoe who knew about it at that time, family members and close friends.
So between 1961 and when Walter Webb, who was the right guy to get involved at that time, no doubt, but in that, how did they deal with it for those 4 years? Did their lives change? How was their emotional state, or were they able to deal with it?
Betty did pretty well with it. She had a series of 5 dreams, and the dreams were about the events of that night that they consciously remembered. But then sandwiched in there was a dream about encountering these beings who looked quite human, actually. In her dream, they didn't under hypnosis, but they had black hair and large noses, and they were dressed in cadets' uniforms. And they took Betty and Barney into a craft and did some examinations on Betty. Barney wasn't in the dream, except for when he was in the car, and at the end of the dream, back in the car. So that was what happened to Betty. She handled it quite well, I would say, except for she became obsessed with this topic and wanted to learn everything that she possibly could learn about this. Now, Barney, on the other hand, felt that this was a topic that would be best thrown into the trash can. He did not want to talk about it. He thought that no good could come of it and that they should just forget about the whole thing. It bothered Barney terribly.
What was Barney like? He looks pretty straight-laced to me.
He was. Barney was very straight-laced, very proper man. Barney was highly intelligent. He had an IQ of 140. He was very committed to his activities in the community and in the state. Always very upstanding and proper.
And before the encounter, now I'm going to ask you this because, he's your uncle, right? So,
yes.
Was he, the way that you looked at him before the experience, was he a fun guy or was he uptight? Was he somebody that, was he the uncle that you just didn't want to get close to because he wasn't cool, because he was straight? If you know what I'm saying.
I know exactly what you're saying, and Barney was, probably my favorite uncle because we had so much fun with him.
Okay.
He had a great sense of humor and had a lot of interest in our school activities. Really gave us a lot of attention, my two brothers and myself.
And how did he change?
Well, over time, after this happened, he started to become reclusive. When he and Betty would come to visit the family on the weekend, instead of visiting, Barney would walk on the backlands of the farm, off by himself. He seemed to be ruminating a lot. He didn't want to discuss the event that happened. And I did find out later that he wasn't sleeping well. He was working nights at the post office at that time. He was driving into Boston from Portsmouth and sleeping during the day, but he was not able to sleep. This just bothered him so badly. He was having the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. He developed high blood pressure. He developed an ulcer that wouldn't heal with traditional medical treatment. It ended up being a bleeding ulcer, and eventually he ended up in the hospital and had to take a leave of absence from work. At this point, he decided to see a psychiatrist to try to find out what was bothering him so badly and to try to heal from it. And one day when he was talking to the psychiatrist, he talked about how he and Betty had gone up to the White Mountains the weekend before to try to put together the timeline on what had happened to them and to jog their memory about the road that they had turned off onto, this little dirt road, secondary road, and what had happened there. And the psychiatrist realized that Barney's problems were connected to that. He was doing fine in the community. He had a happy life. But it all went back to that one event. So that's when, in December of 1963, he made a referral to Dr. Benjamin Simon in Boston. And Ben Simon was an outstanding psychiatrist. He was in Who's Who in America. He was the president of many psychiatric associations. he had made a reputation for himself during World War II for the highly successful work he had with returning soldiers who were suffering from the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. And he had set up the psychiatric unit at the Mason General Hospital on Long Island in New York. And he had success with these soldiers when other psychiatrists had not. He got the most difficult cases because he used hypnosis, and he used it extremely well, deep trance hypnosis, and he probed deeply. Let me give you an example. There was a movie, Let There Be Light, made about his work. It was a John Huston film. And Dr. Simon was shown with a soldier who was blind. And the soldier had been treated. They knew that he had seen a buddy of his killed during the war, and they thought, well, maybe the blindness was caused by that, but even with the therapy, he still remained blind, although there was no physiological reason for it. And so Dr. Simon probed deeper, and he found that it wasn't just that one event. It was the Dear John letter that he had received from his sweetheart a couple of weeks before that. So you combine those two traumatic events, and the soldier can no longer see. And so Dr. Simon brought this in and was able to very successfully treat this soldier. And, at the end, you see him outside playing baseball with the rest of the soldiers who were at the hospital, and then getting on a bus to go home to his family. So it was a big success story, and Dr. Simon received a medal for the work that he did, a commendation medal. And so that's his background. He was probably the best person that Barney could have seen. He didn't know anything about UFOs. Of course, nobody knew anything about abductions at that point. But he was a very good psychiatrist, treating Barney with hypnoanalysis. So in hypnoanalysis, he would ask Barney to go back to the events on the night of September 19, 1961, but also to pull in all events from his life, going back to his childhood, that caused the same kind of emotional response. What else reminded him of this? Whereas with Betty, it was just plain hypnotherapy, where he just took her through hypnosis on the events that had occurred with her. He hypnotized them separately, and he instilled amnesia at the end of each session. For one reason, the events were very traumatic in part, and he didn't want them to relive those traumatic events and bring them into their conscious recall all at once. He thought that it might be too much for them. Also, he wanted to check their story to see if it meshed, if they had the same story or if they were telling two different stories.
So the amnesia wouldn't allow them to communicate after with all of these fresh memories and possibly contaminate one another.
That is correct.
And also, what was their? We're going to move forward with this right now, but what was the status of their marriage? Was it strained, or did it bring them closer through this period?
I wasn't aware of any kind of marital problems that they were having. They seemed to be about the same, except for that Barney would grow quite upset if Betty started to talk about what happened that night. He just simply didn't want to face it, didn't want to talk about it.
Somebody just, Lynn from Australia just tweeted, I have to get this question in. I've never heard anybody talk about this before. What happened to the dog? Did anything happen to the dog?
Well, as far as we know, the dog wasn't taken onto the craft.
Okay.
When Barney returned to the car, he was the first one who was taken back. and the dog was down on the floor, squeezed in under the seat as far as she could go, and was just shaking and seemed very upset. And when she arrived home, she developed a fungal infection on her skin. And also, when she would fall asleep, it was almost like she was having nightmares. Her little legs would run, and she would bark and whimper. Different behavior than usual.
Okay, now, this is it's pretty dramatic stuff that what went down on the craft, and let's start to get into that. And I don't know who we're going to deal with first, Betty or Barney, but how long did the therapy sessions happen, and were all of them recorded?
The therapy sessions went on for 6 months. I have 10 recordings.
You have the originals?
Yes, I do.
Ooh. Okay, I have to ask, do you ever listen to them?
Absolutely. When I wrote my book, Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience, I listened to them over and over again. I transcribed them.
How can you do
that?
that?
The reason I did that was for comparative analysis. I wanted to know for myself if Betty and Barney were describing the same events in detail.
Sure. When you listen to, I've only listened to, parts of both of the sessions. Positively, some of the most terrifying stuff that you can listen to. I don't know how you could relive it to transcribe it, and wow, because it's, what's the word? Honest. I think honest is the word. And especially with Barney, well, it was the same for Betty, but Barney almost seemed childlike and innocent in the way that he went through the sessions. And it is positively terrifying. I mean, seriously.
It was terrifying. Barney broke down. His abreaction came just before the event in the field. And he told Dr. Simon that he wanted to wake up. He did not want to go on. Dr. Simon, being a psychiatrist, and I would never do this as a hypnotherapist, but Dr. Simon forced Barney to relive this experience with a great release of emotion. After that release, that was it for Barney. He did not have a terrified reaction after that.
Rick just tweeted, has any of the family members had that classic run-in with any men in black?
No, not that I know of, not the family members. All I know is that Betty's house was entered a few times. I wrote about it in Captured. And at one point, one of Betty's neighbors, an old man who was in a wheelchair, and he would sit at his window and look out. And one day when Betty's home was entered and some strange things were done, he observed 2 men in black suits. And he just thought, well, probably somebody visiting Betty. But she wasn't at home when it happened.
What kind of strange things?
Oh, sort of harassing things. Let me give you one example. She arrived home one day, and all of the coats had been removed from her closet. They were mounted on the floor. This was after Barney's death, and Barney's scarf was laid over the top.
Oh, that's not right.
No. And another time she came home, and all of her dining room chairs were now in her living room in a circle.
And they thought it was funny?
Just strange things that were done to them to try to unnerve them.
That's right.
Maybe to shut them up or to try to push them over the edge. you could really debunk this case very well if you had a couple who reported that these things were happening.
Of course.
People would say, oh, they're just imagining
They're
this.
crazy.
They're crazy. It didn't really happen. Just forget about all of that. And I think that that's probably what the point was in all of this.
Okay, so back to the regressions. So that goes on for 6 months. Everything is recorded. At what point do they start? Were they revealing anything to Betty and Barney throughout that, or when did they give them the bad news, if you know what I mean? Started to tell them about what was revealed.
I think it was in about April, toward the end of April, that Dr. Simon decided to let Betty and Barney come together and to start to listen to their hypnosis tapes and to, do the talk therapy through that together so that they could just integrate it into their consciousness and recover from the trauma.
Did they do it?
Barney.
Yeah, did they do it slowly?
Yes, this was done slowly from about the beginning of April until about the end of June.
And was Barney's reaction, well, what was Barney's reaction? You've got to be kidding me? Or was it, I knew it, I could tell something went on?
I don't even know what his reaction was at that time. It's not recorded anywhere. It's not written down. Barney knew that this had happened. Barney always remembered the close encounter and observing the non-humans. He knew there was a 2-hour period of missing time. He knew the tops of his shoes were deeply scraped. He knew that something had to have happened. He just didn't know what. At this point, he was willing to embrace the idea that they had actually been captured by astronauts from another planet, you might say. In terms of his emotional reaction, he was doing a lot better at that point than he was before he started therapy with Dr. Simon. He was
cleansed.
His old self again.
Yeah, he was cleansed. He was cleansed, no doubt about that.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, this is Fade to Black, bespoke radio for the masses on the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. We are talking with Kathleen Marden, the niece of Betty and Barney Hill, who was, quite frankly, there. Do you consider yourself a witness in a strange way? Do you consider yourself a witness?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wasn't there on the night of September 19th, but I was there on September 20th. I was there at their home 2 days later. I saw all of the evidence. I met all of the original investigators. So, all along the way. When Betty and Barney were beginning to remember what had happened to them as they were listening to the sessions with Dr. Simon, they would stop by on their way home from Boston and tell the family what they remembered. So, yes, I was, one of the first people to hear this.
Did you meet Walter Webb? Did you meet Hynek too as well?
Yes, I did.
And were they at the house? And how many times did you happen to I was going to say hang out? It just it's too slangish. But how often did you see them?
I met Walter Webb for the first time at the Hayden Planetarium. Betty and Barney and my parents took us, 3 children, down to the Hayden Planetarium to watch a show and meet Walter Webb. I also saw him, I believe it was in 1967, at the Skywatch on my grandparents' farm with Homan and Jackson and a group of scientists. And I met him, Dr. Hynek, at Dr. Simon's home, and I believe that was in 1966 or maybe early 67, when he was out to interview Betty and Barney. We had been invited down for dinner with the Simons, and Betty and Barney decided to take me along.
And did the whole group? What about Kehoe? Did you meet Kehoe too as well? Before I ask this next
No, I
question?
didn't meet Kehoe.
Okay, so you didn't meet Donald. Okay, so how did Walter and Dr. Hynek, were they treating this? Well, I know Walter was, but were they serious, or were they trying to look for the skeptical way out? Were they trying to debunk it, or did they know that something happened and they were actually concerned?
They seemed serious about it to me.
Okay.
Serious and concerned. Of course, you have to take a skeptical approach, but an unbiased skeptical approach when you're doing this kind of investigation. You have to follow the evidence where it leads.
Okay, now let's go back to the craft. As let's go through the story with detail, and the reason why. Well, first off, it's just an amazing event. But I want to get into the details of the star map, and all of that is part of this and how it was revealed. So take us back to that moment in the regressions. Who was taken on the craft first?
Barney was taken on first. Betty was struggling with her captors. She didn't want to go on. This is when her dress was torn. And she gave one of them a good swift kick. She was trying to break free. She was finally taken under control and taken onto the craft. Betty and Barney were taken into 2 separate rooms and underwent examinations where skin scrapings. The ETs were very interested in the difference between humans and themselves. Our skeletal structures are different. They manipulated Betty's and Barney's joints, very interested in their bones, interested in their nervous system as well, appeared to be doing tests on the nervous system, counting or doing something to their vertebrae. And Betty, who had her eyes open, Barney did not, but Betty had her eyes open, and there was a screen on the wall, and they seemed to be recording something or watching something on that screen. They took a sample of her hair. They took samples from various orifices on their bodies, and finally removed Betty's dress, and that's when the zipper was broken. They didn't know how to unzip a zipper. They tried to pull it apart. And the dress was removed.
Was she standing? Was she on a table?
Yes. No, she was standing.
She was standing
when it was removed, and then she was put up on the table. The one she called the leader, that we now know is an escort and sees experiencers over and over again throughout their lifetime, establishes a bond with the experiencer, stood by her head. And then there was the one that served as a doctor. She called him the examiner.
Before we get there, was any of this voluntary? When you say that the zipper was broken, was it because she didn't want her dress removed and they forcibly removed it from her, or was any of this, was she under some type of trance or something where she was able to be passive?
I think that she was passive on the craft once she arrived. It's a funny thing, and I've spoken with probably over 1,000 experiencers at this point, and I am one. And once you arrive on the craft, you tend to become passive. Something happens.
Right. And okay, so now I wanted to jump over to Barney, but let's stay with Betty. There's so much to discuss here. and it's 2 events going on at the same time, in 2 separate rooms. So let's stay with Betty.
Let's stay with Betty through her examination, and then we can switch to Barney's examination.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, so the examiner produced a very large needle that appeared to be attached to some kind of a tube or something like that. And Betty saw that, and what are you doing with that? And he said, oh, just a simple test, just like a pregnancy test, and it won't hurt. And she said, it's going to hurt. Don't do it. And he did it anyway. He plunged it into her navel, causing great pain. Mm-hmm. But the leader did something to her forehead. She saw his hands pass in front of her eyes, and all of the pain went away. And we still see this today. He does something to experiencers to remove the pain when they experience pain. So that was the end of her exam. At that point, the examiner then went into the room that Barney was in and did an identical kind of physical examination on Barney.
Ouch.
The only thing is he didn't plunge the needle into Barney's navel. They placed a cup-like device over his groin and extracted semen.
Right. What was, after they were done with Betty, what was she doing in the room? Was she just sitting and waiting? Could she hear Barney? Or did she not know what was going on and she just sat and waited? Is that what she did?
Well, she didn't know what was going on with Barney, but she wasn't alone in the room.
Right.
The leader was there with her. And then, of course, there's the little short guard who was in the darkened hallway looking in on them.
What did they do? How did they describe the ETs, their physical appearance?
They described the taller group, the doctor and the examiner, as having heads larger than, in proportion to their bodies, than humans, completely hairless, a grayish-colored skin, very large wraparound eyes, almost no visible nose, just a slit for a mouth, large chest area, but spindly, very spindly arms and legs.
And in 1965, there wasn't a whole lot of reference to the descriptions that they were giving. Again, I said this at the beginning of the show. There's a series of firsts that happened with Betty and Barney Hill, and I think this is one of them, describing two different types of, or possibly three types of species or races on board of this craft.
Yes, it was two different species or races, but Betty thought that they looked enough alike that they were somehow related.
Yeah, and I say that, this is something I say all the time on this show, and I know that you're with me on this. If you and I, Kathleen, we jump on a ship and we go to another planet, you and I, just us two, and we get off the ship, they're not going to think that we're the same. They're not. They're not. I'm going to be the fat dude, right? Pale, dark hair, whiskers, goatee, a totally different appearance than you.
And here I am, 5 feet tall with blonde hair.
Yes, good looking as opposed to me. So and so we would look totally different and totally foreign. They may not realize that we are indeed the same race, and I always want to drive that point home. And what if you and I and the dachshund went to another planet and got off, right?
Yeah, Betty and Barney used to joke about that. They said, what did the ETs think about their dog Delcy? Did they think that was their child?
Right.
That Earthlings had little
robots.
Four-legged furry children?
Yes. That's exactly my point. Oh, man. Okay. So Barney goes through the extraction, the groin extraction. They extracted the semen. Did they do anything else? Anything with their heads or their brains? Or and answer that for me, please. But you also mentioned other extractions. And where did that come from? Ears, nose, mouth?
Yes, ears, nose, mouth, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Under the fingernails. Something else they did with Barney is when they looked into his mouth, he felt what felt like a finger enter his mouth. That was the end of his knowledge of what had happened. But over in the room where Betty was standing with the leader, all of a sudden, a couple of these ETs came running in with Barney's dentures, and they started tugging at Betty's teeth. And because Betty didn't wear dentures, so this was very perplexing to them. And so then, they left again. The leader asked Betty a few questions about food, because Betty had mentioned eating. Need teeth to eat, and that Barney had an accident and had lost his teeth, and she explained other reasons why people lose their teeth. That, just a simple conversation. And then she said to the leader, well, I know you're not from around here. Where are you from? And he produced this 3-dimensional star map. And there were stars on it. There were 2 the size of nickels in the foreground on the lower side. And then there were some that were large circles but smaller than that, and some were only pinpoints. And some of them had solid lines connecting them, and some of them had dotted lines. And the leader made Betty realize that the solid lines were trade routes, and those 2 very large stars had several lines going back and forth. And the dotted lines were expeditions. Now, the interesting thing about that star map is the work that Marjorie Fish did on that. I don't know if you want to get into that yet or not.
You know what? Well, you just made me, so we're going to. When Marjorie Fish, and so I'm going to introduce this for the audience. Marjorie Fish was an elementary school teacher. I think she was in Ohio. I could be wrong.
Yes, she was.
She was in Ohio. Okay, and she was a school teacher, fascinated with astronomy and teaching her students and so forth. And she had heard about the star map from Betty Hill, and was just, what's the word? She was fascinated by the story and wanted to see if there was something else to it. Now, when I had the first time, I hate talking too much. You're the guest. But I'm going to say this. The first time that I had read the account of Marjorie Fish and the 3D map and her reconstruction and the timing of everything at that point in our own space program and what we knew about the universe, and in 1961, 1965, 61 is when the event happened, 65 is when the sessions were going down. There was no knowledge of anything that what Betty drew. And that was my aha moment in this entire intriguing story, was that star map. And I think that star map is still to this day holds water. And
it does to this day. In fact, it was recently updated by a young astrophysicist, and the work is actually on YouTube now, and it's the updated investigation of the star map, and it still does hold water after all this time.
So how did Marjorie Fish find out about Betty and Barney Hill?
She purchased The Interrupted Journey, the first book that was written by John Fuller. It was published in 1966 after that violation of confidentiality in 1965, which happened more than a year after the hypnosis sessions had ended.
How did he... Yeah, let's get to Marjorie Fish in a second, because this is an intriguing part of the story. What happened with that?
Well, Marjorie started to construct three-dimensional models.
No, I mean with John G. Fuller, the confidentiality.
Oh, what happened with the confidentiality thing?
Yeah.
Well, after the newspaper articles appeared in the paper, Betty and Barney agreed to give a public lecture about their sighting, not about the abduction itself. They were introduced by the public information officer at Pease Air Force Base, and this took place at a church in Dover, New Hampshire, to an overflow crowd. John Fuller was in the audience. He was in New Hampshire working on the book Incident at Exeter. And that's when he met Betty and Barney, and when he submitted a proposal to them to write a book about this story. And eventually they agreed. So the book was published in 1966, and Marjorie read the book. She saw the star map in the book, and she just thought that if this place existed in our galaxy, that she might be able to find it. At first she thought she would have many matches. In the end, she had only one, and she didn't think she would ever find that one. It took several years to do that. The work she did was extraordinary.
Extraordinary.
We didn't have computers back then that she could use. She had to go to the university, to the astronomy department. She had to borrow their catalogs. She couldn't take them home.
Mm-hmm.
She had to sit there and copy all of that distance data by hand, and then take it home, and using monofilament line and beads of different colors and sizes, representing the colors and sizes of the stars themselves, she constructed, in all, 26 different three-dimensional models over the next few years, and did not get one match. It was incredible.
And these, to describe to the audience, what Marjorie had done is she had these monofilament lines where she would put a bead on it, and it was on a grid pattern. I don't know how large they were, but they looked pretty substantial.
About 2 feet by 3 feet.
Yeah, about 2 feet by 3 feet, with these strings with the beads on it in the correct position in 3D. And
imagine the math it took.
I just imagine the amount of labor and the work that was involved. And of course, now you've got to try to make sense of it and try to line this up. But she hit pay dirt.
She did. It took her 4 years to find a match. One of her models had 256 stars in their proper three-dimensional location, just to give you an idea of the work that went into this. But in 1972, she was able to complete her work when the last 3 stars were found. We didn't know about them when Betty drew the map. Didn't know about them until, I believe it was 1971, when the catalog was released, and there was new distance data there. She went home and she moved those stars around, and sure enough, there was a match.
And I could be wrong, and the Fadernauts, our audience here, which is large and very smart, so somebody's going to try to bust my chops on this, but I'm going to say this as matter-of-factly as I can. Back then, throughout the 60s, we didn't have that many satellites, and certainly in the early 60s, it was just a couple. And we didn't have the knowledge of Gliese or Zeta Reticuli. We didn't know. We didn't have this information until we got satellites up in the late 60s and early 70s to confirm the work of Marjorie Fish and to confirm, indeed, the star map that Betty Hill drew in 1965.
Yes, she drew it in 1964.
64.
And, yes, I mean, Zeta Reticuli is in the southern hemisphere. Betty had never seen that in the sky. She had certainly never looked at the astronomy catalogs. She was a social worker. So this was really an extraordinary find. And this is when Stanton Friedman came into all of this, because Coral Lorenzen, who was the head of the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, APRO, had gotten in touch with Stan and told him about Marjorie's work and how she was trying to find scientists to vet her work. And so it was Stan's job to meet with Marjorie to evaluate her and her work, and then to find scientists. And he was able to do that. And the scientists ended up finding that her work was entirely accurate. So that was a big find.
Heads were spinning.
It was, because there were certain characteristics about these stars that were just remarkable. All of the patterned stars on Betty's map were sun-like, although only 5% of the 1,000 stars in the neighborhood out 54 light years are sun-like, or thought to be at that time. And all of the sun-like stars in that volume of space were on Betty's map.
That's right.
The chance of these things happening by coincidence is estimated to be 1 in 10,000 to 1 in a million.
Did Betty ever? Yeah, oh man, go play the lottery, right? Your odds of hitting the lottery would be a lot smaller. Did Betty ever? Well, Betty and Barney too, up until his death. Did they ever? They never changed their story, did they?
No, they didn't.
I had the America Stonehenge, the owner out there, was on the show actually, I don't know, 6-8 months ago. And Betty came up to check out America Stonehenge.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, in the early I think he said it was the early 70s. And she came in and to, I guess the gift shop area or whatever. Have you been there?
Yes, I went there with Betty.
Oh, you went there with Betty. Were you there when she told everybody there her experience?
I can't remember that part of it, but I do remember walking around the Stonehenge.
Yeah, he said she came in and his family was there and there were a few other people there and she stood there and told the whole story to everybody. Mm-hmm. He said it was just incredible.
Mm-hmm. I probably was with her, but I'm not positive.
So, yeah, they never changed their story.
No, I have to tell you, as Betty aged, she did put humor into it. Maybe she was just tired of repeating it over and over again. And, for example, that part where the craft was over the car and there were buzzing sounds on the trunk of the car, she was terrified at that point in the hypnosis tapes. You could tell from her voice. But late in her life, when she told the story, she'd say that she rolled down the window and looked up and waved and said, "Hi, boys." So that was different. but the substance of the story never changed.
Do you want to take some calls? We have so much more to discuss, but there's calls starting to come in, and I haven't opened up the phone line, so I think some people are pretty anxious to talk to you. You want to take some calls?
Sure,
all right.
I can take some calls.
Okay, I'll open up the phone lines, 323-825-5045, 323-825-5045. You can also Skype in Fade to Black 14. Let's grab a call here. Hi, you're live on Fade to Black. Say hi to Kathleen. Who's calling?
Hi, Kathleen. This is Josh.
Hi, Josh.
Hello, I'm calling from Texas. I kind of have two questions I'd like to ask. There's a few points on there. One is that I had heard about Stan Romanek. He had mentioned something along the lines that about clothing on one of his abductions that it was Betty's gown, I think it was, or something like that.
Yes, I know what you're talking about.
I'm sorry?
She said
I know what you're talking about, and I can explain that.
Okay, thank you for the call, Josh.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So what happened was when Stan Romanek's story first came out, he stated that he had woken up wearing a woman's nightgown. And I was in the audience that day. It was at a MUFON symposium in Denver, Colorado. And the nightgown looked like a missing nightgown of Betty's in the photograph that I saw of it. And I was just startled, red plaid flannel nightgown. And her nightgown did go missing. I ended up having to take her out to purchase a new nightgown. And that same day, I did see a T-shirt on her chair that said something about I was abducted by aliens, and all I got was this lousy T-shirt. And so I put those together. I couldn't remember the color of the T-shirt, but I remembered what the text that was on it. And so we started to wonder, could Stan have woken up in Betty's nightgown? And so I did a lot of investigation on this. And in the end, I found out that it was impossible. The nightgown would have been way too large for Betty. It was not Betty's nightgown. And the T-shirt on the back of Betty's chair was not Stan's T-shirt. It had the same text on it, the same message, but it was a different color. It was a T-shirt that fit Betty. And I actually have a photograph of Betty wearing that T-shirt. It took me years to locate that, but
how would Stan have known this?
Because I spoke to him.
Oh,
I interviewed him
okay.
at that conference and asked him about it.
So, no, I guess the question is, when Stan was describing it, how would he have known what the writing was and so forth?
Well, it was his T-shirt.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I guess I left that part out.
Yeah,
he was missing his T-shirt was missing. He woke up in a woman's nightgown. He'd gone to bed in his black T-shirt that said that he was abducted by aliens, and all he got was that lousy T-shirt.
He told us the story, on the show. I thought, I you know what? It's probably my brain. I thought that he thought it was his wife's nightgown.
No, that was never brought up as being Lisa's nightgown. It wasn't her nightgown. She knew that she didn't have one that looked like that.
See, what did they say with a guy like me? First the body, then the mind, or is it the opposite? Is it the mind then the body? Right? Oh man. Okay. I guess we're gonna leave the phone lines open. 323-825-5045. I've got a whole bunch of questions here that have come in via Twitter. Okay. And so let's run through some of these. The map has a solid line to the sun. If the solid lines are trade routes, who were the aliens trading with?
Well, I don't think that they were, Betty described them as trade routes, but it's my understanding that it's places that they went to most frequently.
Do you have any plans of making all of the audio public?
I do not have plans to make all of the audio public. Betty wrote a directive to me about what she wanted to have happen to those tapes. They are also half owned by Dr. Simon's estate. So, there's medical protection
sure.
For that reason.
And the medical protection extends, how long is that out there for? Is that until Dr. Simon's estate says it's okay? Or does that client-doctor privilege, does that go on forever?
I believe that it's client-doctor privilege, and Dr. Simon's son is also a doctor.
Okay, so therefore, they're going to stay right where they are.
Yes.
Okay. What about implants? Were there ever implants found on either Betty or Barney?
No one ever looked for implants on Betty and Barney.
They never complained about anything?
No.
Okay. So, and I meant to talk about this or ask you this earlier. After the regression is done, now the book comes out. Now the cat is out of the bag fully. What happens to Betty and Barney at this point? How did their life change?
Their lives changed dramatically at that point. They were very busy, under contract to promote the book, so suddenly they were doing a lot of radio shows, making public appearances. So it placed a lot of pressure on them, and they were very committed to the civil rights movement. It took them away from their work And boy, I guess that's about all in terms of the change in their activities. But they did have the opportunity to meet many, many people they would never have met otherwise, including scientists who were very interested in the case, wanting to know about any technology that they might have observed.
And how did Blue Book end up dealing with it between 65 and 69?
Oh, unfortunately, Project Blue Book just basically did a cover-up on it. I wrote about this in detail and captured the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience, but they thought of several prosaic explanations for it. Oh, maybe it was an advertising searchlight. What would that be doing in the middle of the mountains in an unpopulated area?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it was the planet Jupiter.
Right.
What's the planet Jupiter doing with people inside of it and windows, and as large as a dinner plate at arm's length? They explained it with a number of ridiculous explanations that simply do not hold up.
One of the things that we have been talking about of late on this program, or certainly over the last couple of months, the questions of color have been coming up and what it represents. Was there anything about that with Betty and Barney? Did they see any specific colors in their regression where the rooms lit a certain way?
I can tell you that the hallway was darkened. There was a kind of a bluish light in the rooms. When they were being examined, and their eyes were closed at this point, both of them felt like there was a brighter light over their heads at some point. They did not see a lot of color in the rooms. They were all, pretty much the same color on the inside.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I want to move on with you and your research here. And so as we close with Betty and Barney and the incident itself, how were they released? How did they leave the craft? And also, did they ever talk about flying? Did the craft leave the area that they were in?
Yes. What happened is that they were going to be taken down to the car together, but Betty had found what was like a tablet. She called it a book, but it's not like what we think of as a book. It was more like a computer tablet. And she opened it up, and here was a screen kind of thing, and kind of plastic, and there were alien symbols in it, and she wanted to take it home as proof that her experience happened. The leader told her that she could, but as she was getting ready to leave the craft, those little guards who make sure you don't get off the craft with anything that belongs to them became very excited and took the book away from her. And the leader said, well, the decision has been made that you can't keep the book. We've decided you'll be better off if you don't remember this incident at all. And so Betty was very upset. She was arguing. She wanted to keep that book. They took Barney down. They put him into the car. And then they took Betty down a few minutes, maybe a couple of minutes later. And when she arrived at the car, the leader said to her, if you'd like to stand here and watch us leave, you can do that safely. And so she, at that point, asked Barney if he'd like to get out, and they both got out of the car. And the craft became a very intense red-orange glowing orb. That was probably what they had conscious recall for. And then it rolled over and over, and just rose up vertically and took off, disappeared from sight.
This just came in from Dan. He says, in Captured, you discuss the scientist's telepathic experiment with Betty. Why did the scientists think it failed?
Well, they didn't really think that it failed. I was very cautious when I wrote that book. They said that they could not find conclusive evidence that the UFOs that showed up were brought there by Betty through her telepathic communication. So, for example, Betty was scripted. They gave her a script, and she every single night at a certain time would attempt to communicate with them. Go to the Barrett farm in Kingston, New Hampshire. Land there. You will not be harmed. And a craft did land on the Barrett farm, my grandparents' farm, about 500 feet away from my childhood home. They couldn't prove that Betty was responsible for bringing that craft in. Maybe it was just going to come in and land anyway. It was during a UFO flap in the state of New Hampshire. So that was the problem. Another time they gave her the word moccasin. They wanted to go to a certain location. It was Moccasin Street, I think. And they wanted the craft to be hovering up above Moccasin Street. Well, sure enough, there was a craft there. The only thing is they looked through their files, they found that another craft at some other time in history was seen over Moccasin Street. So they thought, well, we cannot say scientifically that Betty vectored this craft to this area.
How much more proof would they? Well, what do they want?
Yeah, I know. To us, it seems. I mean, I'm a social scientist. That seems like pretty solid evidence to me, but not to physical science, I guess.
Whatever happened? Didn't they send out the dress for testing and the pink dust and so forth? Whatever happened with those results?
Yes, the dress has actually been tested in 5 different laboratories, and started out at the University of Cincinnati in the chemistry lab. No one has ever been able to reproduce the effect on that dress. UC, use chlorine bleach, acid, a base treatment, ultraviolet light, a sun lamp. Nothing would cause the blue on that dress to fade to pink. And they did a lot of other chemical experiments. And then, let's see, Lefty Levengood, Dr. Levengood, did an experiment where he shredded up pieces of the dress, the blue part of the dress, the pink discolored part of the dress, and then just plain water. And he watered seedlings with the water from each color, different part. One was the control, one was the blue part, one was the pink part of the dress. The seeds watered with the pink water grew at an extraordinarily fast rate. This is another anomalous finding. Phyllis Budinger, who is an analytical chemist. She worked for BP Amoco for 35 years and did an analysis on Betty's dress, the most extensive one that was done. And her findings were anomalous. There's something on that dress. We don't know exactly what it is. It shouldn't be there. And Betty's statements regarding what happened to her are consistent with the findings on the dress, such as the pink powder has completely saturated the arm area of that dress, where she said that the ETs wrapped their very long fingers around her shoulders as they were escorting her to the craft.
Hi, you're live on Fade to Black, Dino. Say hi to Kathleen.
Hi, Kathleen. Hi, Jimmy. I'm enjoying a
Hello.
wonderful full moon in Aquarius coming through my skylight. It's beautiful. Perhaps I'm going loony, but Kathleen, I want to thank you. I was not aware that a relative of Betty and Barney Hill was doing this. And this is the first UFO case that I really took seriously back in the day, you know. And I'm just enjoying. I want you to speak more about, you know, the personal experiences and maybe things that they told you personally. And one of the questions I have is, were they ever afraid? I mean, after all this happened, they didn't remember it until regression hypnosis. But for the rest of their lives, were they paranoid? Were they afraid? Were they sorry that this happened to them?
Thank you, Dino. Thank you so much.
Yes, some good questions there. And I want to tell everyone, if you're going to be in California, I will be there at the Contact in the Desert UFO conference, May 29th through 31st. And I'm actually going to be speaking on the evolution of contact from 1961, so I'll be discussing the Hill case. I'll be showing slides of Betty's dress, of all of the evidence, discussing all of that, and up to today, and the changes that have taken place over the years. But in terms of Betty's and Barney's level of fear, oh yes, but Barney died very young. He was 46 years old. He had a massive cerebral hemorrhage during a snowstorm in 1969. Betty lived on to be 85 years old, and she was still frightened. Whenever she would go out looking for UFOs, if something came down that she thought might be one, she would get back into the car and drive away, decide to go to a different area. You know, it was the first thing she thought of when she woke up in the morning, the last thing she thought of when she went to bed at night. She never fully lost her fear. But at the same time, she was fascinated by the fact that she had actually met people from another planet and would like to have seen them again. In fact, I think she probably did see them again, but didn't remember it.
Why do you think it is, Kathleen, that, and I talk to experiencers and contactees about this all the time, and I try to be as candid as I can with these types of questions, which is some you know, it's not a bad experience, and they look forward to, or you know, hope that maybe they could have another contact. You know, they almost enjoyed it. And then others, maybe the majority is, you know, it's a frightening experience and they don't want to have another one. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with personality and the level of fear. Individuals who only remember what I call the procurement process, where you are actually taken, or the process where you are returned. Those two times in any contact experience are extremely frightening. Mm-hmm. And if that's all you remember, then you are terrified. You're scared silly.
Right.
And so you might read, there's a lot of negative information in the media. You might read that and you might build what had happened into a very negative experience, even if you only remember a little segment of that experience. Now, there are other people who have gotten beyond that. They might have been very, very frightened initially, but they eventually had memories of what happened on the craft. And they remember that once they arrived on the craft, they felt calm, they felt in a familiar environment, that these ETs delivered messages to them of telepathically, that they loved them, that they were members of the family, that there was nothing to fear. They would not be harmed, that this was to help mankind. You know, it was that sort of thing that causes people, I think, to look upon their experiences as being positive. Now, some people, regardless of whether it's a positive experience or not, do not want to be unwilling participants in medical experiments.
Who would?
No, well, some people don't mind because they think it's for the benefit of humanity.
Could be. Not this guy. I'll tell you that right now. Well, what is your opinion on reasons why, some contactees have conscious memories of their experiences, while others, it seems like everything is intentionally suppressed?
Yes, that is a very interesting question. I've been working on that one for years. I can tell you that
it's called telepathy. I'm reading your mind right now.
That over an extended period of time, for people who have been taken periodically throughout their lifetime, now they're in their 50s, let's say, and they're beginning to remember the experiences they had on the craft, much more so than earlier in their lives. And they're beginning to receive information from the extraterrestrials that they can take with them. And this is progress. There's something going on here, and I suspect that the ETs are permitting them to remember this, whereas they would not permit it earlier, either because they were attempting to protect them from the fear. Of course, they had the fear because they're remembering being taken, but apparently the ETs didn't realize that part of it. Also, it's natural for us to repress information that personal experiences that are terrifying, that feel life-threatening. So that's something that our mind does for protection. Years ago, I used to think that perhaps Betty and Barney had simply repressed the memories, but I now realize that it wasn't them, it was the extraterrestrials who helped them out with that.
Well, do different races deal with, the procedures differently?
They're all about the same from what I'm hearing from over and over again. It seems like everybody is essentially going through the same kind of procedures. You might belong to a group where you have a different status than another group. For example, you might belong to a group where you're more involved in what the ETs are doing and sort of an overseer of the humans rather than as someone who is just a breeder, for example.
Sure.
It's that sort of thing.
Hi, you're live on Fade to Black. Say hi to Kathleen. Turn the radio down.
Where you're more involved in what
you have to turn the radio down. 3.
I don't have it. Yeah, I don't have it. Can you hear that?
Yeah. Okay, go ahead. Hi, you're live on Fade to Black. Say hi to Kathleen.
Hi, Kathleen. How you doing?
I'm fine. How are you?
I just tuned in. Sorry to step on you. I just tuned in, and you were talking about people's past memory of abduction, etc.
Yes.
And I have a story that I've never told anybody about that. I'm 70 years old, and Jimmy, your show has made it comfortable for me to call and talk.
Thank
you. When I was a young teenager, I had these little guys coming to get me, little short gray guys and big tall gray guys. It just scared the heck out of me. And I was afraid of them. Mm-hmm. And it happened 2 or 3 times. And then one night, I had what I always thought was just strange mental aberration. I was taken off the earth, and I could see the earth getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and until we almost got to where I felt the moon was. My face was towards the earth, and I was going back out, and I kind of panicked, and that's the last I remember. I woke up the next morning. Mm-hmm. The next time it happened, and I was still having this little 2 little gray guys, and maybe a tall gray guy. and I didn't know anything about the Greys at that time. It's a long time ago. I was kind of blown away at the time, maybe 40, 50 years ago when I first ran into this. Somebody said something about Greys, and it clicked this memory. And it's not a memory that I had forgotten, but it was something that I recognized, but nobody had ever told me, or I had never run into any occasion to know that there was something like that out there. But the next time it happened, that while I was asleep, I had this little mental feeling that I was taken to a separate room with 5 or 6 people and put in a rather sterile environment. Mm-hmm. Are you still there?
Yeah, we're listening, man. I'm on the edge of my seat right now.
Okay. Well, the second time this happened was I was taken to this rather classroom type. It was a little sterile. I'm not trying to say that it was a spaceship or anything like that. There was a place to sit there, and there were several other people wandering around, and there was these eraser boards. They weren't blackboards. They were eraser boards. I don't know when that just clicked, but it did. This has been many years ago. I was probably 15, 16 years old, maybe younger. And we were set up, and there was a pedestal out front, and they came out and told us that we were getting ready to be given some information that nobody else had, and that we would need no more information after this for any point in our lives.
Well, what did they tell? What did they tell you?
Go ahead.
I said, what did they tell you?
Well, they had the book open, and they were getting ready to give us this information, and then someone came out and said, "I'm sorry, you people can't have it."
Oh, no.
And that was the end of the dream. Now, I'm frightened of this because of the other 2 experiences about being whisked away from the earth was just scary as it could be.
Sure.
And then that was an emotion. I don't know if you will understand this, but it was not a fear like somebody was threatening me or anything like that. It was an emotion of fear. Mm-hmm. And this lack of knowledge, or this lack of being told knowledge, was a sense of great emotional frustration. Mm-hmm. I didn't wake up in a sweat or shaking like that, but there was something different about that. But I embarked, for my entire life, I embarked off on this rather eclectic idea of just reading everything I could read, and even things I don't understand, and I still do this today. I've got, sitting here around my library, I've got things of almost every facet of knowledge that you can think of. I just read anything, stuff that I don't even understand. I'll read it, I love it, and I'll put it up, and I'll go back to it later when it might come relevant. Now, only one time in my life have I ever seen anything in the sky, and it was midday in Boulder in around 70 or 71. I was walking home. I was on my way home to eat lunch, and hopefully I was going to get there in time to listen to Paul Harvey on the radio, so it was 11:45 or 12 o'clock. Right. I looked up and coming over the Flatirons. Are you aware of what the Flatirons are?
Oh, yeah.
Boulder?
Oh, yeah.
I was at the intersection of the highway that goes up towards Lyons and the main street of Boulder. I can't remember the name of the intersection, but it was a main highway. And I looked up, and coming over the Flatirons were these silver discs, and it's hard to describe them as silver because they had edges, but they were soft like pewter, and there were 2 or 3 of them circling each other in the sky, and then there was one coming towards it. At that point, I thought, now you've got to be rational about this and believe that, figure out what's going on. So I was trying to figure out how far away they were, or whether they were coming from the west towards the east, because that would have been me, or whether they were coming from the ground up. The most peculiar thing about this whole event, other than the fact that I ended up seeing 5 or 6 of these discs, no lights or anything like that. They were this soft gray silver color, and they came in at different angles, and they circled each other and did a little dancing, and they all shot off in different directions. But the thing that stayed with me most was that I couldn't tell whether they were rising or coming forward. I could not put my mind into a situation where I could understand what was going on. It was totally beyond my ability to understand. And I have thought about this for many years, trying to figure out what it was that I saw, but it wasn't one individual thing. It didn't have a bunch of lights blinking. It was in the middle of the day, and there was probably 15 minutes of that. Now, having said all that, your conversation that stimulated me to call, when I remember these events, other than that sighting, I remember fear. Mm-hmm. And a couple of times later on in life, I've maybe waking up in the middle of the night with a sense of foreboding like that, fearful. But for the last 10 or 15 years of my life, I have not been afraid of it. It's one of those things that I would like to experience again because I have more knowledge of what's going on around me. Mm-hmm. That's pretty much the end of the story. I don't know if you have any questions about it, but that's all I know to say about it.
And maybe that's not why you're not fearful now. You know, what I find most extraordinary is that here you are, 70 years old, and you're speaking about this on the radio for the first time. And I have to tell you, hundreds, if not thousands, of people are coming forward who are in their 50s, their 60s, and their 70s, talking about these events that have happened throughout their lifetime, events similar to what you have just described.
Exactly.
And
Hey, caller. Real quick, what was your name? I didn't get your name.
It's Bill.
Hey, what I would like to do is set up Bill on next Thursday. I want you to call in. I've got your number here. Call in and that's that's our Fader night. And
I know that, and I've been listening for a long time, Jim, and I am trying to do that, but I'm having a hard time even talking to this blank smartphone I've got here because it doesn't even tell me this. And there's something happens after about 50 that I want to become a Luddite as opposed to anything else. But yeah, I will try to do that, and I'll set it up as Bill, and I've been trying to get on with the Fader knots. I've tried that for a while. I was train of thought, you know.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. But and I'll say this to you directly, Bill, and Kathleen, this is the first time she's been on the show, but we have a very large audience. And this show, I allow everybody to come on this show and share their experiences here. And I thank you for that, Bill. Seriously, it's not easy to talk about, just like you just said. And but
well, Jim, your show is very, very impressive.
It's very what?
It's impressive.
Oh yeah, thank you.
I've been listening to late night radio since there has been. I think that my first introduction was Richard Hoagland was on with Mike Murphy in Kansas City 40 years ago or something like that, and mentioned art.
Right.
And that was the night I tuned in. I mean, it's been a long time. But as I listened to you and your show and the Fader Knots and all these different people, and particularly your guests, it's a very impressive show. And I thank you for being there so that I can call and tell this story. The story's not nearly as meaningful to me, I believe, as it might be to people listening to it, but it is a mystery.
And I want you to call in on Fader night so we can actually spend some time. I actually have some questions for you. Thank you so much, Bill. Call me on Thursday, Fader night.
Thank you very much.
You have a good night. You know, Kathleen,
yes.
You just said it yourself. I've got tons of calls backed up. So, hey, Sergio, hold on for a second, okay? Stay with me.
All right.
Stay with me, Sergio. Kathleen, you said it yourself. You hear the exact same story over and over again, and his story goes back even before Betty and Barney Hill. He's 70 years old. It's going back 50 years now. At what point do the skeptics just throw up their arms and say uncle and give in?
I don't know if they ever will, because if you have a very strongly held emotional belief, you will adhere to that belief regardless of how much evidence to the contrary is presented to you. So, it seems that skeptics have very strong emotionally held beliefs. So I don't know if they'll ever give in. Even if one lands on the White House lawn, they'll figure out some kind of explanation for it.
You know, and I don't know if I told you, but the exciting news is, just like last year at Contact in the Desert, we'll be broadcasting from there live Friday night. So we'll be giving away a bunch of tickets. We'll have a bunch of Fadernauts there, and we'll get you on the air that night. But I can't wait to actually hang out with you at Contact in the Desert. I can only I think you're as cool as you seem.
Oh, well, thank you. And I'm really looking forward to being there this year.
Yeah, you didn't go last year or the year before?
No, I didn't. I was invited to for the past 2 years, but I didn't have the opportunity to get out there. And so this is going to be my first time speaking at Contact at the Desert.
Wait till you see what it's like. You're going to see 3,000 or 4,000 people on, I don't know how many acres they have there and the facilities and everything, but when you walk around and you see what's going on, you're going to flip. It's amazing. It's a really great event. It's humongo. Whatever you're thinking, it's bigger. Okay, so. Okay.
And so I'm looking forward to this.
Hi, Sergio. Say hi to Kathleen.
Good evening, Kathleen. Good evening to you too, Jimmy.
Hello.
First time caller.
Okay.
Ian, I was wondering if you Kathleen, if you could just expand a little bit more on the details of the map that you started to describe. Exactly what planet or star system did she describe? I don't think you finished giving the details on the map.
Okay, Sergio, we'll jump into that in a second, but go over to Twitter. And we have those images posted in Twitter. Just go to @JChurchRadio, and we have the star map up there. And I'll have my producers repost it right now. So go check that out in Twitter as you listen to Kathleen run through it one more time. And I actually have a couple of more questions for her on this too. Thank you so much, Sergio.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Concerning the star map, and again, he raises the detail of how many stars were involved.
There were 16, I believe, on the map. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 connected by lines, if I counted correctly. And then there were some other dots that were not connected by lines.
Were there any of the lines, refresh my memory? Okay, there it is. The star map just got popped up here. Okay, so I'm actually going to click on this myself, and I'm going to enlarge
12 connected by lines.
Okay, so
count it again.
Okay, so there's Gliese over here. Here's Zeta Reticuli. And you can see how they go up and connect and go all the way up to Gliese 67 from Gliese 59.
Yes.
But was there anything that connected back to our star system, or was this it? Was this the way that Betty drew it?
The sun is on it.
What's that?
The sun is on the star map.
Okay, and which one is our sun? Is that Sol?
Okay, go to the right side. You see Zeta Reticuli 1, and almost straight up, a little bit slanted to the left from there, Sol. That's our sun.
Gotcha. Interesting. And so they're not, so the trading, as she called it, the trade routes were only out from Gliese 86 down to 59 and up to Tau 1 all the way over on the left. And then the other trade route that was up at the top. But it doesn't look like they were like interested in us. Were they just coming by? You know what I mean? There was no trading going on here. What was their interest in coming to Earth?
I think Betty thought that it was an expedition at that point, that they were attempting to determine the differences between themselves and Earthlings. I don't think she was right, because it seems that they've been around for a very long time. But perhaps this is part of the experiment with they left us for several hundred years, perhaps, and now they're back checking up on their experiment.
Now, I'm going to change gears a little bit. I want your opinions on a couple of things. E.T., malevolent, benevolent?
Malevolent or benevolent? I have to say that the majority, I believe, are benevolent, but there are some reports of malevolent ETs. We also have reports of what often people think are extraterrestrials but are probably parasitic entities coming through in more of a paranormal sense.
What do you mean by parasitic?
Parasitic entities. This is quite interesting, and I had never been interested in this before, but I started to encounter quite a few experiencers who were having experiences in their homes that were different than the normal ET contact experience. And so I started to speak with a very well-educated, scholarly man who's been in that field for a very long period of time, the paranormal field. And these are, he doesn't call them demonic entities, he calls them parasitic entities that attach to human beings. And they can get to a human who is abusing drugs, who is abusing alcohol. Something happens and it makes the attachment easier, and they apparently ride around in this human's body, feeding off the human. They can taunt the person. They can make the mattress seem like there were snakes crawling through it. People will end up having claw-like scratches on their bodies a lot, but not the other marks that I see on experiencers' bodies. So that's what I mean by parasitic entities. They also feed off the electrical system of homes, I am told, so that your electric bill might be very high when they're around.
Interesting. When we the reptilians come to mind, and I want your opinion on that. But with when you have two different intentions here, malevolent and benevolent, good and bad. With Betty and Barney, which side of the fence were those ETs?
I would say benevolent.
They had bad intentions.
No, they had good intentions.
I mean, they had good intentions.
Yes.
But yet Betty was not wanting to revisit. And I also, with that, and I think Betty talked about this, did they do anything to comfort her? I know the leader did when she was dealing with pain, but did they do anything to make her feel good and make her feel comfortable and less apprehensive? Or were they just putting up a shell and didn't show emotion?
No, they tried to reassure Betty that it was just a few simple experiments, that she and Barney would be released unharmed, they could go about their way, that they would not be harmed, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and when you talk to experiencers who have had, a very, very, very bad experience, I think, and is it your opinion that you can't change their minds, that, there's actually good extraterrestrials that are here that have good intent? You can't change their minds. Why is that? Is it just completely embedded in their conscience?
I think so. I think that, they did have such a terribly horrifying experience. Maybe they were abused. Maybe they were harmed. And, they can't get beyond that. And we do have this type of story coming from people who have had either MyLab abductions or abductions with reptilians. Do they have emotions? These creatures?
Yes.
They, years ago, I really specialize in the grades. Years ago, we used to hear that they didn't have emotions. I am wondering if part of their experiment what has been to give themselves a wider range of emotions, because I've received many, many reports of them seemingly displaying emotions or projecting emotions on humans.
In that, do they actually care about the fear that we're going through? Do they actually care what they're doing to us? If they're so far above us, we don't care when we go out into our backyard and spray mosquito spray before a barbecue, right?
Well, they're not trying to kill us.
But you understand what I'm saying? We're not emotionally connected. And
yes, we're not well, maybe we are. They do project this sense of intense love upon humans, some humans. Maybe not all of them, but I hear that over and over again.
When we get a call from like Bill earlier, and you have so much research that you have done into this, what do you say to experiencers that need to talk?
Well, what I say is I am the International Director of Abduction Research, Experiencer Research for the Mutual UFO Network. If you go onto MUFON's website at MUFON.com and look under research, you'll see an experiencer questionnaire. If you take that questionnaire, the results will go to me. I have a team, and if you ask for a member of the team to get in touch with you, you will receive a phone call from a member of the abduction research or experiencer research team. We are a support team. We're not an investigative team. If you'd like to have an investigation, we'll tell you what that entails. If you're looking for someone who will listen to your story, will be non-judgmental, someone who has listened to other people. We've had 1,000 reports come in the past year. Then you've gone to the right place. Also, you can go to another organization that I'm affiliated with. It is the Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters. They also have a support arm. They have a buddy system where you can hook up with somebody who is going to talk to you about your experiences. They have a list of hypnotherapists. They have a list of support groups. So if you need support in that form, then you can go there and select somebody off that list who specializes in that kind of thing. So there's a lot more available today than there was 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So if you feel you want to talk to somebody, there are people who are willing to listen.
What do you do to separate something that may be imagination as opposed to a real experience? Is there something that you, it's maybe even in that questionnaire, is there something that is raises that flag where you can take that person off of the list?
Well, that questionnaire is based upon very good research, scientific research on commonalities among experiencers.
Right.
And I did the research with Denise Stoner in 2012. And so we do have statistics, and we're looking for commonalities. If you don't have those commonalities or not a lot of them, it doesn't mean that you didn't have an experience. It might mean that you've just had your first or second experience, and this hasn't been happening over a lifetime. It's not my job to determine whether or not you've had a real experience. I'm not on the investigative end of this.
Right.
My job is to help you determine that if you want to look into that. My team and I will teach you how to look for evidence. We'll point you in the direction of reading material. where you can determine, for example, if you're having hypnagogic hallucinations, hypnopompic hallucinations, sleep paralysis, that kind of thing. How to separate all of those things out and how to look for evidence.
How did you get to be so cool? I just have to ask you.
Gee, well, thank you. I never think of myself as being cool.
Well, is it your family? Were they completely open-minded and that allowed you to? I mean, obviously, there's the experiences that the family has had, but is it? Were you just raised that way with an open mind? And I can only imagine what Thanksgiving dinner is like at the house. It must be fascinating
a lot of political discussion, I have to tell you. There were some good political arguments around the dinner table. But yes, I was raised in an intelligent family, highly inquisitive, politically oriented, and so I guess I grew up being inquisitive and wanted to pursue the answers, and that's what I continue to do.
Thank you for doing what you do. We all roll that rock uphill every single day. Thank you so much, Kathleen.
You're welcome.
I had an extraordinary night tonight. We'll be seeing you in a couple of months right here at Contact in the Desert. All of the information for Contact, of course, is at jimmychurchradio.com. You can also go to Kathleen-Marden.com, and her website is there. And if you need to contact Kathleen, you can also do that through her website as well. And MUFON as the experiencer researcher. Thank you so much, Kathleen.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure being on your show. Thanks for having me.
And we'll have you back very soon. We'll see you in a couple of months.
Okay, I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you so much, Kathleen.
Good night.
Good night. Kathleen Marden, everybody. Wow. With that, thank you so much. The Betty and Barney Hill Interrupted Journey. What a great time. I'm going to take a quick break. This is Fade to Black, Bespoke Radio for the masses. Let me look. I got a couple minutes left. I'll be taking, I'll take a couple more calls. I'll be back right after this. Stay with us.
Way out here, we listen to Jimmy Church.
You're listening to Fade to Black.
¿Qué tal, mis amigos? Yo soy Mario Carson, el tiburón, y los invito para que escuchen a mi buen amigo Jimmy Church Radio. ¡Claro que sí!
Oi, oi, I'm Reese Evans. You're listening to Jimmy Church. This is Revolution. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution is on radio. Ciao.
All right, everybody, welcome back. Fade to Black. Bespoke Radio for the masses. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. I got time. Phone lines are open. I'll take one or two calls. 323-825-5045. 323-825-5045. You can also Skype in Fade to Black 14 as we wind down another night. I just, one of the things that that drives me to do this show every day is exactly what we did tonight. To just go down a road like that and paint the picture. And the Betty and Barney Hill story is still one of the most fascinating, one of the most documented. James Earl Jones. and that movie. It's just one of those stories that it happened in 1961. And when you involve the star map and the descriptions and everything else, that there was a whole series. I said it 5 times tonight. There was a whole series of firsts that went down with Betty and Barney Hill. And we can't escape so many different facts in the case. One of them, they were an interracial couple. The last thing that they wanted in 1961, and you have to go back and think about the environment in the United States that was going down at that time. They didn't need that type of attraction coming to them. They had their own struggles day to day as a couple. And who they were in the community. And when you take everything in its totality with the Betty and Barney Hill story, it is, to this day, it is something that needs to be looked at and researched. The debunking that they have tried with the case, it's all been, I don't want to say the word unsuccessful, but in the Betty and Barney Hill case, which is something I say all the time, you can't say prove that it happened. I need to flip it around. Prove that it didn't happen. What's the proof that you have that it didn't happen? Because all of the evidence is stacked up 6 feet high. I got to thank Kathleen Marden for coming on. I wanted to get to this earlier, and I didn't get a chance. A couple of news things here. And one of them was that only 8 of China's, and talking about everything that's going on today with Earth. Listen to this. Only 8 of China's 74 large cities have managed to meet official air safety standards in 2014, according to the Environmental Protection Ministry. This is 5 cities more than in 2013. When only 3 of the cities, Haikou on the island of Hainan, the Tibetan capital of Lhasa, and the coastal resort city of Zhoushan, officially met air quality standards. 7 of the 10 most polluted Chinese cities are around Beijing, despite the capital's efforts to combat the situation. There were also 471 environmental emergencies in total in 2014. Insane. The particles considered to be the most harmful to health, PM2.5, are slowly decreasing down to 93 micrograms per cubic meter from 106 this year in Beijing. But that's still 3 times the approved limit of 35 micrograms. China does not expect to reach the safety standard before 2030. Think about that. 2 Renaissance sculptures of a nude man riding a panther may have been created by Michelangelo, says the British Museum. The Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge says that the bronze sculptures known as, get this, the Rothschild bronzes, and dating from the 1500s, were probably created just after the famed artist David and just before he painted the ceiling of the Vatican's Sistine Chapel. The museum and researchers at the University of Cambridge say they have compelling evidence that the works attributed to a Dutch sculptor are actually from Michelangelo. And if so, they are the only surviving Michelangelo bronzes in the world. Insane. I'll be back right after this. This is Fade to Black, bespoke radio for the masses. You got to love it. Doug Aldrich going to take us out of here. I'll be back right after this. Follow us on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Shoot me an email to Jimmy@jimmychurchradio.com. I'll be back right after this.
Hi everybody, this is Rob Halford, the Metal God on JimmyChurchRadio.com.
What's up? My name's Brian Taylor, Ninja Badass Extraordinaire, and this is JimmyChurchRadio.com.
JJCR in your face.
JimmyChurchRadio.com.
All right, everybody, welcome back. Fade to Black. It is the Monday edition. Thank you for everybody coming in tonight. Thank you for the phone calls. Thank you to Kathleen Marden. Tomorrow night, Frank Joseph Hoff will be joining us. We're going to be talking about Atlantis, Richard Hoagland, and a couple of other things. Tomorrow night, Frank Joseph Hoff will be in with us. Don't forget, there are a variety of ways that you can listen to this program. You can go to jimmychurchradio.com. You can go to Spreaker. You can go to faders.org. We are, it is baby steps. We are, we're still working out the technical side of TuneIn and also iHeartRadio. We're right about ready, but it's one of those things. These are live broadcasts going out. And there's technical issues that have to be spot on the money. I don't want to, put up links. We don't want to put up links to TuneIn and iHeart and have there be issues there. But we are very, very close to getting that lined up. But again, thank you for chasing us down and listening to the program tonight. Tomorrow night, Frank Joseph Hoff will be joining us. With that, I'm going to wrap it up. I am just worn out. Kathleen, an amazing night tonight. Thank you so much. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Thank you to all of you Fadernauts who came in and hung out with me on Saturday night over at Coast to Coast. That was a great time. More on that later. Thank you to Kathleen Marden. Fade to Black's executive producers, Rita Kamarian. Shows produced by Hilton J. Paulman, Mark D. Kovar, LJ3, Renee, and Jonas. Announcers are Steve Harder, Gene Vito, and Mark D. Kovar. Fady by Dale. Webmaster is Method of Signaling. Music by Doug Aldrich. Intro by Spaceboy, spaceboymusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network. Tomorrow night, Frank Hoff. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. I want everybody to be safe. See ya.